Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today I'll be giving my quick reaction to episode 6 of the Rings of Power, Udun. As usual, I'll record a longer recap discussion with Paul later in the week. As for Udun, that is a reference to Morgoth's abandoned fortress that we likely saw in the frigid north in episode 1, and in a flashback in this episode. And there's a region named after it in Mordor. Most notably, Gandalf invokes the name in the Fellowship of the Ring during his fight with the Balrog. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. Gandalf with the excellent taunts. It seems like an appropriate title, given that we see the culmination of a plan likely hatched in Udun, resulting in the eruption of the soon-to-be-named Mount Doom. This episode was easily the most action-packed of the series so far. We saw the merging of two storylines, Numenor and the Southlands. And the episode was in essence an extended battle sequence. With Mount Doom erupting, and Bronwyn and Arondir declaring their love for each other, felt like a season finale. I was very surprised to see Southlanders fighting the Orcs, Numenorians sailing to Middle-earth, riding their cavalry inland, the good guys winning, interrogating Adar, and Mount Doom erupting all in one episode. Wow. I mean, they really pushed the plot forward. With the volcano's eruption already having taken place, it seems now that the likely season-ending dramatic moment will be Sauron's reveal. And I'll talk more about that in a second. The Southlanders' battle with the Orcs is definitely invoking Helm's Deep. Massively outnumbered, battle at night, defending archers firing down on Orc troops, the non-fighting citizenry fearfully awaiting the outcome, the battering ram sequence, the game-changing cavalry charge at daylight. Now, it's nowhere close to Jackson's Helm's Deep, but let's face it, what is? And I will say that they ratchet up the tension quite well. When Adar is brutally executing people one by one to get Arondir to talk, I was legit horrified at the good guy's predicament. Cauterizing Bronwyn's through-and-through arrow wound, like, woof, brutal. And let me give props to Benjen Stark, aka Adar. He's arguably the most compelling character on the show. And now that we know he's not Galadriel's brother, as was long rumored, I can appreciate him all the more. So it sounds like he was one of the original elves captured and tortured by Melkor. And if that's the case, he is one of the oldest characters on the show, going back to the early days of the Years of the Trees. Here's a quote from the Silmarillion. "But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Autumno, aka Udun, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor? Yet this is held true by the wise of Erisea, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor, ere Autumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs in envy and mockery of the Elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life, and multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make. And deep in their dark hearts the Orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Ilúvatar." So the show is definitely taking inspiration from that quote. Tolkien revised his theory on the origin of orcs over time, but here it's clear that he's saying Melkor did not create orcs. Melkor could not create life. So the best he could do was take elves and corrupt them into orcs. But essentially orcs were living beings that had been created by Eru. And that's what Adar brings up in his conversation with Galadriel. Adar claims that he slew Sauron's body because he was continuing to experiment on and torture the Orcs in his service. As a proto-Orc of sorts, Adar has a kinship to them. I think he does feel like their father, Adar. He tells his Orc followers at the beginning of this episode that for the first time, they won't be fighting as slaves, but fighting as brothers. His plan is to create a habitable region for the Orcs via the volcano. But obviously this is not the joyous liberation moment for Orcdom. Sauron has apparently outwitted Adar to aid in his return. The reveal that Adar had given the good guys a decoy wrapped in a dish towel was admittedly fairly lame. I mean, no one bothered to check to see what it was. No one? It passed through a bunch of hands. I'm not buying it. Feels like lazy writing. Find a better way to deceive Galadriel and company. Also, the progression of the interrogation scene felt awkward. Galadriel and Halbrand both taking turns keeping each other from killing Adar seemed false, like a forced plot convenience. And I'll say Galadriel comes off as a genocidal psychopath. I mean, I believed her when she said she'd kill all of the other Orcs first so that Adar could feel the full extent of his failure, and then suggesting that she should begin parading the Orcs out into the sunlight. It's like, yikes! I assume we're supposed to think Galadriel's racial hatred is rooted in some deep-seated emotional baggage. So be it. She needs a therapist. And that brings me to Sauron. If Adar is to be believed, Sauron seemed to be repentant after the War of Wrath, trying to bring peace and order into the world. Though that seemingly good turn was undercut by the fact that he's also experimenting on Orcs to attain some form of arcane power. I think he was searching for a way to control the wills of others, to make them bow to his own will so as to bring about this order that he craves. The idea of a repentant Sauron comes from this Silmarillion quote. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith. For under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwe departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. So now that we've met all the players, Mount Doom is erupted, and there are only 2 episodes left, and assuming we're getting a Sauron reveal at the end of the season, who is Sauron? I'll do these Sauronometer scores in my recap with Paul, but I do want to talk about Halbrand. My immediate reaction to this episode was to downgrade his Sauronometer score. He seems devastated by the torture Adar put him through. He saves Elendil's life. He opens up to Galadriel. But one line of dialogue made me second-guess downgrading him as a Sauron candidate. During his conversation with Galadriel, which at first sounded like a I have feelings for you conversation, please no. Please no. I'll just say that. But upon further review, it sounds more like something a repentant Sauron might say. The line is, fighting at your side, I felt if I could just hold on to that feeling, keep it with me always, bind it to my very being, then and Galadriel cuts him off. It's that line, bind it to my very being. Like, ooh. One interpretation of that line might be, wow, it felt good to fight on the side of elves and men for once. If I could find a way to make elves and men fight on my side always, Say by way of some magic controlling rings, I could bind them to me and bring order to Middle-earth as one of the good guys. Just a thought. In any case, let me know your thoughts on Sauron, and I'll see you next time. Bye!